everybody. Good morning. I'm David Vanderzee. I am Mr. Vanderzee's brother. I am from the United States. I am from Michigan. And I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about some biology. So, David Vanderzee, we're going to talk about that. So, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about myself, what I do. That way you can see whether or not biology might be something you want to do with your life. So I'm a fourth year zoology student, which zoology is basically a smaller subset of biology. And that's what I study at Michigan State University. And here's some pretty pictures of my school. Here's our mascot, this is a statue. Here's a nice, pretty picture of nice green grass, and this is what it looks like during the winter. It gets kind of cold. In my spare time, because I'm a normal person too, I like to, I play ultimate frisbee on my university's club team. I like to go backpacking and hiking and camping, and I also like to climb tall rocks. So I decided that I wanted to study science when I was in about 9th grade. I took biology as my science course my freshman year of high school, and the concepts of evolution and cell biology both really made me excited about science and got me wanting to study biology with more of my university kind of studies. So here's a nice picture of some evolution happening and a nice diagram of cell. So in high school, before I attended Michigan State University, I was fortunate enough I got to do some university level research while in high school. And so what I got to study was the interaction between the fruit fly, or Drosophila melanogaster, and its predator, the zebra jumping spider, or Salticus cyaneus. So here's a nice picture I took of a spider eating a fly. So I got to do an independent research project while I was in high school, which was exciting. This was the title. I'm not going to make you read or understand any of that, but I'm just going to briefly go through what I talked about. Okay. So what I did was I examined the relationship between this predator and prey, and we looked at how the individuals changed between the ones that got eaten and the ones that weren't. So the flies that were successful and would survive, even though these spiders were trying to eat them, tended to be smaller. So this is what this graph shows. Here we have how well they survive and how big they are. So this is getting bigger, getting smaller. As you can see, as they get bigger, they do worse. If they get really small, they start to do worse as well. But for the most part, smaller was better. One other thing that we looked at was the size of one of their leg segments. So their second leg segment of their second leg was really important in their ability to jump quickly to escape the spiders. So here we see these shorter legs. This on the x-axis is the relative length of that leg segment, and again on the y-axis we have how well they survive. So as this goes up, they're surviving better. You see the shorter that leg segment, the better they survive. And so that's a brief summary of what I did when I was in high school. Now that I am an undergraduate at Michigan State University, I work in actually the same lab. And I recently had a paper that was published in the journal called Gigascience. Very pretty picture of my paper. And what we did was we constructed a database of images of wings and used different analytical and statistical approaches to look at that same data set and see how maybe the same data might come from different approaches, or if you have this same data set but you go at it from different angles, you can get slightly different things. And that's more or less what we did with that. I also worked for the past 3 years on a project called the Wing Dictionary Project. And it's very complicated. It's been going on for about 7 years. So I've only been working on about the last half of it. But what we've been trying to do is construct what's called a genotype-phenotype map. And that's what this is a kind of a reduced picture of. So over here, we have a representation of something called the genotype space. which is just your genetic code. You know, the genes that you have inside of you, or for us, it's flies. So the genes that these flies have. On the right here, we have what's called the phenotype space, which is just the way that the flies are physically. So genotype space, phenotype space. Genotype space, just the genes. Phenotype space is a trait, so something as simple as arm length. So with the flies, it's the way that their wings are, which is a fairly complex trait, and we use some dimensional analysis to make that more simple. So what we're trying to do is create a map to say, if we have these genes, what is the wing going to look like? Even though we could, theoretically, if we did it really well, we'd be able to have a bunch of genes that we could look at and be able to predict what the wing would look like. And if we did it well, we'd be right. Or you could go the opposite direction and say, here's a picture of a wing, what are the genes going to be? And again, if we did a good job, we should be able to go backwards in both directions. And this, currently, we have 2 different papers that we're working on from this project, and they're going to be submitted to the journals PLOS Genetics and Genetics. And this, even though it's kind of fruit flies, their wings, who cares? It actually has a lot of very important medical applications, because if we can construct this map with something small and simple like fruit flies and their wings, then we can use that as a stepping stone toward understanding the much more complicated 23 chromosome human genetic system. So recently, I studied in Ecuador with my university. I got to go to the Galapagos Islands and the Amazon rainforest to study biology. So I'm going to share some of my experiences. Alright, so the Galapagos Islands, a little bit of background. They're in Ecuador. They are on the equator, so the equator's right there. There are 18 major islands. They are 1,000 kilometers from the mainland, or about 600 miles. And depending on which island it is, the islands are between 4 and 0.7 million years old. So the way they're formed is they're volcanic in origin. So these islands over here are the young ones. These ones are the older ones. These are about 4 million years old, 3.5 million years old. These ones are only 1 to 0.7 million years old. The way that they are formed is there's a volcanic hotspot right around here, underneath the crust of the earth, underneath the ocean, and magma comes up through that hotspot, and when it hits the water, it cools down and becomes land. So as the tectonic plate has shifted, moving this way, these islands were formed over here and have since moved all the way over the course of the 4 million years. These younger islands are generally bigger because they haven't had as much erosion, and what happens over time is they have these big volcanoes that, after they move off of the hotspot, become more dormant, so they don't get as much new land, and then erosion starts happening, they start to break down, and then they become smaller and more flat. We'll talk about Volcano Wolf. So Isabella Island right here has 5 active volcanoes, and Fernandina has 1 active volcano. So there are 6 total active volcanoes in the group of islands. I was on Isabella, and we visited Volcán Chico and Sierra Negra. But Volcano Wolf is the one farther north. And on May 25th of this year, so fairly recently, just a few weeks ago, it erupted. And so it looked like this 3 weeks ago, and a week and a half ago, it looked like this, which was kind of exciting for me because I was in the Galapagos while there was an eruption happening, which I was very excited by. But the eruptions in the Galapagos aren't as spectacular as the ones like Pompeii or Mount St. Helens, because the volcanoes and the rock that makes them has a lot more iron in it. So the big explosive volcanic eruptions that we see, a lot of times in movies where there's this big explosion, that's because there's a lot of silicone in the rock. And so it heats up very unevenly, and it causes a very violent explosion. With these volcanoes, the rock, because it's iron, it heats much more slowly, and so the eruptions are more gentle because it doesn't have this violent, rapid heating of a bunch of rock. So it just kind of pokes through the side and the lava runs out. So it's not the big spectacular explosion, which is good for the life on the islands because if it were the other way around, they probably wouldn't survive the eruptions. So the Galapagos are known for having a lot of very unique biology. First of which are their iguanas. So they have marine iguanas, land iguanas, and famous pink iguanas. Now, who can give me a guess as to which ones are the pink iguanas? The bottom ones. All right, very good. All of these pictures of the wildlife that I'm going to show you are all taken by myself and my friends while we were in the Galapagos, except for this pink iguana one. That's the only picture that my friends and I did not take because we didn't visit Volcan Wolf, which is where these pink iguanas lived. So they were worried when that eruption first started that the pink iguanas might be in trouble, but it's okay. The pink iguanas live on the north side, the eruption is coming out of the south side. So it's all good. I mean, they're very pretty and pink, so everyone was scared for a moment. So the marine iguanas are really neat. Even though they're reptiles, they swim down into the ocean and eat algae off of the rocks to feed themselves because they live on these barren desert islands with nothing but black volcanic rock, and so there's nothing to eat on the land. But since they're reptiles, they're cold-blooded. So they can't be in the water for very long, otherwise they will get so cold that their metabolism shuts down and they die. So it's a pretty risky activity to go get food because they're going into this cold water that's pretty much killing them, but they have to get their food. So they have to go in really quick, get their food, and come back out. And so if there's a lot of tides or the currents are really strong, sometimes they don't make it back. Another unique thing about the marine iguanas, you can see this nice white stuff they have all over their face. That's actually salt. And because they are reptiles, they can't handle all the salt from the ocean. It would suck away all the water from their system and they would dehydrate and die. So to deal with that, they have special glands in their nose, and when they come out after eating, they sneeze a lot. And these sneezes have a lot of salt in it, because that's actually what that white is. It's the salt after that water's evaporated. This one's a male because it's got these spikes and it's large. You can't really tell from the picture, but it would be larger than the females. The land iguana, this one right here, that's also a very big male. You can tell because he's large and you can't see very well, but he's got those kinds of things going on there too. They live on a slightly different group of islands than the marine iguanas because they are dependent on eating vegetation from the land. So on some of the islands they eat flowers, but on most of them they eat cactus pads. So even when it's very dry and there's not a lot of plants for them to eat, they can go up to the cactuses and they eat the prickly pear cactus is what it's called. It's nice and juicy, has a lot of water in it, and that's how they survive the dry season. The pink iguanas live on Volcan Wolf on the north side. There's only about 100 of them, but they were recently discovered in about 1980. And it was really exciting because these two species they knew were related to each other. The marine iguanas came first, and the land iguanas evolved from the different marine iguanas. But these pink iguanas actually represent the link in that evolutionary chain, which, if you study evolution, generally doesn't happen. These links in the chains generally don't exist anymore because evolution is such a slow process. But since the Galapagos are so young, we have a really good picture of what happened. So these marine iguanas have been around for about 11 million years. These pink iguanas have been around for about 7.5 million years. And the land iguanas have only been around for 4.5 or so. So it went kind of in the evolutionary pathway, went from marine to pink to land. But they still also all exist. They didn't exist as the current pink iguana while they were alive. Tortoises. So the Galapagos Islands are named after their tortoises. When the Spanish first landed there, they saw tortoises that looked like this one. And they saw that crazy shell shape. And they thought, what does that look like? It looked kind of like a horse saddle. And since Galapag is to gallop, they called it Galapagos. So that's the name of the islands. Now, you can see here, these two tortoises have very different kinds of shells. So this one right here is called the saddle shape. This kind tend to exist on the islands that have higher vegetation. So there were 13 different species of tortoises in the Galapagos. Now there are only 10. 2 of them have gone extinct because of humans, and 1 of them went extinct because of volcanic eruptions. So these ones live on the islands where there's high vegetation. So they have to reach up and get it. So if they had these kinds of shells, they wouldn't be able to reach very high because the shell would get in the way of their neck. But because they've got these big gaps right here, you see how long his neck is, he can extend that and reach up really high and get food that's farther off the ground. So on islands that have food high off the ground, you tend to find these called saddleback tortoises. Now the dome-shaped tortoises, like these guys, look more like rocks walking around. Sometimes they're called the living rock tortoises. They live on the islands where there's a lot of vegetation on the ground. And so since they're just leaning down, they don't have to stretch their neck up. And so the shell is this nice dome shape, as you can see this one on all these guys. This particular tortoise is really important. It's named Genesis. It was the first tortoise that was successfully bred in captivity in San Cristobal Island. And all of its brothers and sisters did not survive childhood, but it made it, and so it was a very exciting moment for the scientists who are trying to help the tortoises recover, because a lot of them are not very, they're not very robust. They have very small numbers compared to what they used to because of humans coming in, destroying their habitat, and eating them. So there are a lot of recovery projects. It's a really big national project that they're working on. And so Genesis is really great. He or she is about 10 years old. They don't know whether or not Genesis is a male or a female. We'll find out when it's about 20 to 25 years old. That's when they become adults. Birds in the Galapagos. There's some really cool birds. So this right here is called a frigate bird. They, as you can see, the males, this is a male, he's got this big red pouch on his front. And what they do is they stand on their nest and they inflate it. And they show off to all the ladies. They say, check out how big my pouch is. And if you've got a really big pouch, you get all the ladies. It's like a sports car and a fancy watch. Frigate birds also, they're very cool because once the big red pouch male has a lady that he picks, or picks him rather, they make their nest and they work together to raise their chick. So the male will sit on the egg while the female goes and gets food, or the female will sit on the egg while the male goes and gets food. And after it hatches, one of them will stay and babysit the chick while the other one goes and gets food. But they also get food in a unique way. Instead of actually going and catching food themselves, they act like pirates. They just float around, hang out, flying in the air, and wait for another bird, kind of like these boobies or gulls or herons, to catch food. And while those birds are trying to fly back to their nests to feed their young, they attack them and try and steal their food from them instead of catching it themselves. So you see this nice point on their beak? They've got that little hook. That's actually thought to be designed for jabbing into the back of birds like this one while they're flying, so that way they go, ah, and drop their fish out of their mouth. So they're kind of mean. They are really, really impressive flyers. It was really cool seeing them fly. They also have to bathe. So because they have to be so good at flying to go and harass and steal food from other birds, they have to be really good at flying. And when they go down toward the ocean, salt gets on their wings. And if the salt builds up on their wings, they can't fly anymore. So they have to go wash themselves in natural pools of water. There's a lake called El Junco on San Cristobal Island, and that is where a lot of them wash themselves. So that's the frigate bird. Over here, we have the famous blue-footed boobies. You can probably guess why they're called blue-footed boobies. They've got those nice blue feet. In the Galapagos, there's also masked and Nazca boobies. So there's 3 different species. But these blue-footed boobies are really special because they are fishing birds. So what they do is they will fly around over the water, and when they see a fish they decide is a good meal, they dive down into the water and catch it, like inside the water. So they dive under the water, swim back up, and then pop up and float around on the water eating their fish or flying it back to their family. And it's really cool to watch. I actually got to see it while I was in the water, so I'd look underwater and see, a bird zip through and catch a fish. That was a lot of fun. They're blue feet. We'll talk about that. So their bright blue feet are also really attractive. Both males and females have these blue feet, and when they show interest in each other, they walk up and they like dance. They do this patting with their feet to show off. Look how blue my feet are. I'm really healthy. Because the blue feet come from a chemical called carotenoids, and those carotenoids help their immune system. So if you have really blue feet, it means that you're probably very healthy. You don't have any diseases or parasites. So the two of them do their little dance. They show off how healthy their feet are, how healthy they are, and then if they're happy with each other's feet, they'll go and have a nest and have some babies. A thing with the babies of blue-footed boobies is that if there's more than one chick in the nest, the two babies, or I guess there's never three, it's always one or two. If there are two of them, they will fight each other because only one gets raised at a time. So if two are born, one of them will win the fight and drag the other one out of the nest and go back into the nest. And so the other one will die because the parents won't take care of it at all. They just let the fight happen and respect the winner. And that's kind of an example of survival of the fittest. It's not always all happy and pretty and dancing blue feet. There is suffering in the Galapagos. Finches. Finches. The Galapagos is very famous for its finches. Charles Darwin had a lot of his evolutionary theory influenced by the finches of the Galapagos. It's kind of a funny story because when he first went to the Galapagos, he didn't think the finches were very cool at all. He thought they all looked about the same. He thought that they were common species from other places. And so when he caught some and brought them back, he put them in the same bag, even though they were from different islands, because he didn't think they were important. And so when he got to the Royal Society in England and had them try and identify them, all the real bird experts were really confused because he had them all in the same bag. Well, these are definitely different, but we can't tell because you didn't put them in different bags, man. And so they actually had to ask the cook of the boat he was on, who did put them in different bags, for his collection so they can understand them better, which is kind of a fun story. The finches, these two right here, are called the woodpecker finches. It's kind of a silly name because they don't actually peck the wood. They create tools. So they take sticks, they break sticks to a particular length, and then they use those sticks to dig bugs out of the bark. So that's what those two do. There's also the famous vegetarian finches, which eat bark. And then there's multiple species of ground finches and insect-eating finches. And they're really famous. They're used even today for evolutionary studies on Daphne minor and Daphne major. A man named Peter Grant from Princeton University does some really great evolution research. He's had a project going for about 30 years. And he more or less proved that evolution happens back in like the 70s, like 78, the drought of 78 is really important in that. But those are the finches. They're really, really awesome. And they're also very friendly. They'll show up and hang out on your table while you're eating, try and steal some of your food. After the Galapagos, we went to the Amazon rainforest, and we went to the Iguanas River inside of Yasuni National Park. These are the boats we took. It was a 4-hour boat ride to the lodge, and everything we needed, all of our food, all of our water, all of our clothes had to fit in 2 of these boats. So we didn't get to bring very much with us. It was a lot of fun though. And then here is just a nice picture of a kapok tree. They're very famous trees in the rainforest, very tall. That one's not a very big one, but I think it's pretty. And that's my hat. Yay, I was there. Alright, so we stayed at the Shirikuno Lodge, which is right here. This was my room right here. We had 4 of us. It was very nice because you could finish your day in the rainforest and hang out in the hammock. This right here, that's my hand. I held that bug. Yay. It's kind of scary looking. It is called a tailless whip scorpion. And whip scorpions are kind of an intermediate between spiders and scorpions. And they're pretty freaky looking. They actually are completely harmless, so it can't hurt anything, even though I'm holding it and it looks very scary. They were one of my favorite things that I saw in the Amazon. We saw a ton of them. That was one of the bigger ones. You can see how big it is based on my hand, but there were bigger ones than that I did not try and catch. Yeah, so whip scorpions, I think they're really cool. I like bugs a lot though. In the rainforest, some of the cool things we saw. This right here, you can see this used to be a grasshopper, and now it's got all these fungal growths on it. So it's this fungus called cordyceps. It's a family of fungi. This one happens to be the cordyceps for this grasshopper. They're also sometimes called the zombie fungus, because the way that they work, they're really, really cool. They infect their host, so they get their spores either inside or on the host. It depends on the different species. So some of them get eaten by the host, some of them just stick to the outside. But once they reach a certain number of critical mass, they start secreting chemicals that control their host. So this grasshopper, at some point, had so many spores in it that they started mind controlling the grasshopper. And so the way that the spores mind control it, they secrete the chemicals and get the organism or the insect to go to a place that's really good for that fungus. So the cordyceps that infests bullet ants, which are these really big, mean ants that the stings hurt a lot. Luckily I didn't get stung. I had a friend get stung. He said it was pretty painful for about a day. They will climb up a tree all day long, and you can flick them down. If they're infected by this zombie fungus, they won't care that you flick them. They're normally very mean and they'd attack you. They'll just keep trying to climb up this tree. You could knock it down all day long, and it would just walk up until it was dead. Because once this zombie fungus, these cordyceps have taken over, they don't have any other motivation other than doing exactly what this fungus wants them to do, which I think is kind of freaky. Fortunately, there aren't any cordyceps that get anything that's like a human or any mammal or anything, so you can sleep okay. Don't need to worry about zombie fungus coming and eating your brain. Yeah, so that was really cool. We saw a couple grasshoppers that had been turned into zombie fungus, and we also saw a really big stick bug. Unfortunately, I don't have that picture, but it was about this long, and it was just full of fungi at that point. Biodiversity. I just want to talk about that in general. The Amazon has the most biodiversity out of the entire planet. In area the size of the campus of my university in the Amazon, if you went through and counted the number of species of trees just in that small area, and these are only trees that are this wide or bigger, there would be more species in that small area than there are in all of North America for trees. So there are so many different kinds of trees. This is a nice picture that shows some of that diversity. You look and there's just different stuff everywhere. Whereas if you were in another location, especially in North America, you'd see something that's just all pine trees or all oaks. So this is really gorgeous. There's tons of stuff everywhere. It's really, really fantastic to see. We also saw some mammals. This right here is a squirrel monkey. They're really cute. They go around in family packs of 30 to 50 individuals, and they move all day. They never stop moving, so they wake up and they just go around in the jungle in their group. They grab food and they try and eat it really fast before the bigger, stronger ones in their group can go grab it, and then they just keep moving all the time. And sometimes they follow monkeys called capuchin monkeys, which are known to be the smartest, and the big group of spider monkeys, or of squirrel monkeys, will follow the capuchin monkey because they know that the capuchin monkey is really smart and it knows where all the food is. This right here is a woolly monkey. We actually had some of those throw poop at us while we were walking through the rainforest. So that was kind of fun, I guess. But yeah, so we saw some mammals. We also set up camera traps, and we saw video. We didn't see them in person, but we left them out at night. And so when they were triggered, there's a motion sensor on them. When they were triggered, we saw they'd record the video, and at the end we collected them and looked at the chips and saw the videos. So we saw ocelots, we saw a lot of capybaras, and yeah, capybaras are really cute. Reptiles and amphibians, we saw a lot of reptiles and amphibians as well. This right here is a little baby caiman. It was really cute. It's like this long. They can grow to be up to 2 meters long, and they're a little bit more scary when they're that big. But that one's a nice little cute one. This right here is called a house gecko. They like to hang out inside houses. That's what they're called, house geckos. And they make really loud noises at night. So they're really fun to have in your room. This right here is a rainbow boa. This one right here, it tried to bite my friend Zeke. At least that's what he tells me. Before he got this photo. Really, really pretty snake. I was not with him when that happened, unfortunately. But they got to see that. This right here is a poison dart frog. They're really famous. The bright colors, warn predators. Don't eat me, I'm poisonous. And this right here, this kind of Kermit the Frog looking frog, is called a glass frog. These frogs are really rare. It was really cool. I was with the group that saw this one. We went out in the middle of the night into the rainforest, had our headlamps on, looking for frogs, and we saw this one. As you can see, it's very, very green, and you can't see very well with this picture, but their bellies are completely clear. So that's why they're called glass frogs. So if you grabbed that guy and held him up and saw his belly, you could actually see his intestines and his organs in his stomach through his body. So that's why they're called glass frogs. They're really cool. All right, what can you do by studying biology? What's the point? Why would I do this? What can I do with my life? So as we've talked about a little bit with lab research, you can do that professionally, make a career out of that. You can also do plenty of research in the field, going out and studying things as small as ants or as big as whales. And there's tons of opportunities to do research. You can also go into medicine. Most doctors start with degrees in biology. Industry. There's actually a lot of industrial jobs for biologists. My friend's dad works for a shampoo company, and he's a molecular biologist. So you might not think that many industries need biologists, but they do. You can also work in conservation, or you can be a professional naturalist and get to bring people around these awesome places like the Galapagos or the Amazon. I'm going to end by talking a little bit about what I study, which is marine biology, and we're going to talk about human effects on the ocean. So anthropogenic is just a long word meaning caused by humans. So we're going to talk about anthropogenic oceanic effects. The first one of which is called ocean acidification. If you've taken chemistry, you probably know what acids and bases are, and you might be familiar with the pH scale. The ocean has what's called a buffer system built into it. So it has this carbon, carbonate, bicarbonate, carbonic acid buffer system. And it's called the buffer system because if you add acid or base to it, it doesn't change in pH very much for a certain amount of time. So here's a nice graph showing that. If pH as base or acid are added, you've got where it normally, it likes to hang out right here. And so it doesn't change very much until you've added a whole lot of stuff. But the problem is, we have added a whole lot of stuff to our ocean. And so even though for the past tens or even hundreds of millions of years, the pH of the oceans has been 8.2, we're currently at 8.1, which might not seem like a big change because it's only a change of 0.1, but pH is what's called a log scale. So every time you go, if you went from 8 to 9, you'd be changing by 10 times the pH. So this change of 0.1 is actually a 25% change. So the oceans are 25% more acidic today than they have been for the past hundreds of millions of years, which is a pretty rapid change in terms of evolution. So what this causes, because the ocean is more acidic, a lot of organisms in the ocean build their bodies out of a substance called calcium carbonate. And it's basically chalk. And the problem is it's a basic compound. And so because it's slightly more acidic, the water is actually eating away at their bodies all the time. So a good analogy would be if my hand just exposing it to the air where I live caused my skin to start peeling off all the time. That's basically what's happening with these boreholes sea urchins, and these small pelagic calcium carbonate organisms. And this is a big problem because phytoplankton, which are the base of the food web in a lot of the ocean, and copepods, both build their bodies out of this calcium carbonate substance. And so by having them constantly being eaten by the water instead of by other organisms that need them to live, we're hurting the biology of the ocean. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about some problems with how we do fishing and some solutions. So there's this practice of fishing called trawling, where basically you take a big net and you drag it on the bottom of the ocean. You catch a ton of stuff. It's really great. You can catch a whole lot of fish. But the problem is, after you trawl the location or drag this net over it a lot of times, you go from having something like this to getting a location like this, because you've got this big heavy net that's just catching everything. And this doesn't look like a very good spot for raising fish, does it? Another problem we have is this practice called long-lining, where a boat will put out up to 100 kilometers or 60 miles of line with thousands and thousands of hooks. And they'll just leave it for a day or two, and then they'll reel it all in and see what they caught. The problem is when things like dolphins or sea turtles or sharks or even birds try and get the food from these hooks, they can be stuck and they'll end up dying, even though that's not what we're trying to catch. And so a lot of tuna fishing is done this way, and so sometimes dolphins or turtles get caught when we're trying to catch tuna. The final problem I'll talk about is problems with quotas. So the way that most fishing systems work is the government says, this is how much fish you can catch. And then the fishermen go out and they catch how much they catch. But the problem is people aren't really following the rules. See, here we got the green is how much they're supposed to be catching, and red is what's actually being caught. And as you can see, catching a lot more than we're supposed to, and that's because we're not enforcing the rules. There's nothing that happens to people who break the rules. They're going to catch more because they make more money, and there's not any problem for them for it. So some solutions. In the United States, we've had a lot of success with creating areas called no trawling zones. So instead of dragging that net on the bottom everywhere, they have specific spots that you're allowed to and not allowed to. And that lets the habitat recover and young fish to grow up in these areas that are no trawling zones. They'll move into the trawling zones, and then we can catch fish more sustainably. We've got these objects called TEDs. They're turtle exclusion devices, and they make it so less turtles get caught in these trawls. They can swim out without making it so the fish can't get caught. And we need to enforce the quotas and have a better job of our legal system supporting conservation. And the last thing is aquaculture, which I know Chile actually does a fair amount of aquaculture, which is growing fish in farms. So growing them, like we raise chickens and cows and things like that. Any questions?
It's about the boobies.
Okay.
They start fighting just after they born, or they wait a few days?
Right after they hatch. And so what happens a lot of the time is if one egg was laid before the other one, the one that hatches first will have a couple days of growing, and then the second one will hatch, and that one's definitely going to lose the fight because they'll fight as soon as they're both out.
About your high school research, it was your idea or a teacher
So I was part of a program that part of the whole program was to try and do research at a university, but I picked my project, and I wanted to do research in that field, so I approached the professor about this.
13?
I was 17.
Oh. You can put the one of the careers with.
Oh, you want me to go back to that slide?
Yeah, you can. The one of the biology. Yeah. What you can explain a little bit what is researching in the field.
Oh, sure. Field versus lab research. So, field research is when you're actually out in nature collecting your data, So if I went, while I was in the Galapagos or while I was in the Amazon, if I went and did a study outside in the natural environment, that would be field research. Lab research would be if I'm inside a building, controlling everything, like I do with my fly research. It's all indoors. We're manipulating everything directly, and so that's lab research. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Now you are doing field research.
So I did a little bit of field research while I was in the Galapagos, but when I go back to Michigan, my job is in a lab. So I'll be doing more lab research.
And when you did your research in the school, you were working for your school or in a private lab?
So yeah, so the labs that I work in are extensions of my school. So they're led by professors that work at my university. But they're not always funded through the university. So in the United States, research is often funded by outside entities, generally governmental ones, that give things called grants that fund the lab. But the labs are supported through the university.
And which are the protective measures for animals and plants in the Galapagos?
Oh, that's a great question. So the Galapagos, they have all that unique biology, and they do a really great job of keeping it safe and not letting other things come in. So when you go to the Galapagos, your bags get checked. They go through, they look for any seeds, dirt, animals or plants that you're trying to sneak in or accidentally bring. And anytime you go between two islands, you have to go through that whole process again. So you're not accidentally bringing any seeds from one island to another, or you've got a sea lion in your bag you're trying to bring home, anything like that. But yeah, they do a really good job of enforcement, and that's one of the reasons it's still such a beautiful and pristine biological location.
About one of the first slides of the graphic between genotypes and phenotypes.
Mm-hmm.
Can you go back?
Yes, absolutely.
That's it. I didn't understand how can you go between, first in a genotype space into a phenotype space.
Right.
How can you develop the phenotype space?
So the phenotype space is just the trait itself, right? So if we're doing something like a certain list of genes and how long your arm is, for a simple example. What the phenotype space would just be arm length. So you just have like a number, this is how big your arm is. Here it's this grid because most of the time you're actually looking at something that's a little more complicated, but if you were doing just arm length, it would be like just a line. Like on the far right there, you have fitness. So you can do arm length and just have it moving up and down, and then it would look like those genotypes would just be pointing to a certain point on it. Does that make more sense?
Yes.
If you have some more questions or you want to say hi to David, he'll be here during the recess and the rest of the day. And thank you, of course, to Ms. Anita for bringing all of you biology students, and thank you to my complementario class for